Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello everybody, welcome to the final module on stress psychophysiology. In today's session, we shall discuss about the different psychiatric disorders that are related to stress and may be aggravated due to stressful conditions. So in today's session, we will talk about the anxiety disorders, which are very much related to stress, depression, adjustment disorders, and also see how stress affects the psychotic disorders like schizophrenia. So what actually happens in a stressful situation? We've seen that stress is associated with negative life events, but positive events also may be stressful to an individual. For example, say if an individual has gone through a financial crisis, loss of a loved one, or maybe going through a bad marriage. These are all negative stresses. But again, if there is a marriage that has just happened, or there is a new job, very high paying job that an individual has got into, or has joined a new college, maybe gone to a different part of the world to join PhD in Western college. Now all these factors, though they are positive stresses, may actually induce stress. Nevertheless, they are stresses. Another major stressor in life is the loss of meaning, or the meaningless or lack of goal in life. We have talked about this earlier when we were talking about philosophical reasons related to stress. And several times, especially among students, I come across several students telling me that I really don't know what I am doing here, why am I studying engineering, or why am I studying medicine, and what will I do after this? What if, why would I join a job in Walmart or Deutsche Bank? Is that what I really wanted to do when I was a child? Or I just wanted to learn engineering. Several times while running after our goal, many times we lose track of the goal and we really don't know where we are going. So once if we stop and listen to ourselves, that by itself may cause stress, because it may not have a consonance to what our initial purpose in life was. Now, I'm not trying to scare you people, but the point is that yes, these are definitely some stresses that have been seen affecting human individuals. Now, talking about life events or positive and negative events in life, Holmes and Rahe actually did an extensive study, and they prepared a scale where you can where they said that if the larger number of life stresses, life events may lead to depression. You can go through the Holmes and Rahe scale. You can just Google it and go through it. Maybe I will provide a link to it also. Now, getting to stress and psychiatric disorders, we see that stress is anything that challenges a person requiring some kind of adaptation. Serious stressful events include losing a loved one, getting fired from a job, being a victim of crime, or having conflicts with close people. Here we are talking of negative life events. But stress in the environment can worsen biological vulnerability, worsen symptoms, and cause relapses. So that is how it is related to psychiatric disorders. So some people who have the biological disposition to be or proneness to develop a psychiatric disorder, maybe because of a genetic disposition, actually they are more vulnerable to a stressful situation than compared to one who does not have a history of family members suffering from depression or anxiety disorders. Say if there is a student whose parents, whose mother is very anxious, or a family member is suffering from a major psychiatric disorder, during the examinations, or if there is a prolonged amount of stress for a long time related to studies, academics, or college life, the individual may be vulnerable to a breakdown as compared to others who do not have this genetic disposition. Now, mind it, it does not mean that each of you start wondering right now that if I have somebody in my family who is having a psychiatric illness, I am going to get it. It's not necessarily so. It is just that you may have a proneness to develop an illness or a disorder. Now, mind it, disorder is something that is not in order and it can be brought to order. So, if you follow the systematic ways of dealing with that, you will be in order. So, there is nothing to lose hope. Now, before we get on to the anxiety disorders or stress related disorders, we must understand the difference between stress and anxiety. Now, everyone experiences stress and anxiety at one time or another. What is the difference? Stress is a response to a threat in a situation. Most of the times it's a biological response to threat. If you see in the previous sessions, we have been talking about how the body responds to stress. Anxiety is a reaction of the body to that stress. So, here we are actually talking of the psychological makeup, which definitely affects the physiological makeup of the individual, and what it is actually a resultant of the stressful situations. So, it is a resultant of the stressor. In this case, when we are talking of stress, we are actually synonymizing it with the stressor. Now, when we are talking of anxiety disorders, all the anxiety disorders are actually increased due to in these the individual is prone or vulnerable to anxiety disposition. So, in these disorders you will see that the individual's response to anxiety is more than others of who are not suffering from the disorder. So, we will start off with generalized anxiety disorder. In this, the anxiety is manifested as uncontrollable and excessive anxiety and worry about events and activities. So, you can often come across such an individual, maybe as a friend, or maybe you are going through such anxiety, or maybe you have seen this in a family member who constantly worries about things. So, we call them very often worrywurts, but does not mean that these individuals may have a severe breakdown. So, they are carrying on with their regular life, but what happens is they develop somatic or bodily symptoms relating to the stressful conditions. We have now already covered all the areas why a person's somatic symptoms develop because of stress. Today, we are just going to talk about the symptoms that develop in anxiety disorders. Now, here it may be these worrywurts may be complaining. We can see symptoms like restlessness, fatigue, irritability, muscle tension leading to several aches and pains like headaches and migraines and other forms of muscle aches like getting cramps easily, or exacerbated spondylosis. And of course, concentration, lack of concentration, it also affects the focus of attention, and also the individual suffers from sleep difficulties. Several times you come across people with generalized anxiety disorder complaining of not being able to eat properly, or maybe they are eating too much. So, there is a dysregulation in appetite also that is seen in anxiety disorders. In generalized anxiety disorder, what we see is a free floating anxiety. So, it is not actually focused at a particular thing. The individual talks about anxiety about, he has anxiety about everything almost in the world. So it could be, why isn't somebody coming home early today? So why isn't, why did the teacher look at me like that? Why, maybe if I am going out for dinner with my friends, maybe they will actually be amused with my behavior, or maybe they will ridicule me. So it's not only, so you cannot actually point this as social anxiety. So it's focused, related only to situations where there is a social situation, but it could be also related to several other factors, like about anything. So it could be a worry about self and health. Why am I palpitating so much? I just climbed the stairs, but I think today I'm palpitating more than other times. Why am I perspiring so much? What will happen in the exam? What will happen if we don't reach that place early? So basically, such people are worrying about everything. As you can well understand, this is also related to the personality type. Now, coming to panic attack and panic disorders. Now, panic attack, very often you will see students having a panic attack just before a presentation, or before an exam, or before an interview. Now, what happens in a panic attack is there's a feeling of terror that strikes suddenly with no repeated, or strikes suddenly repeatedly, but without any warning. So, but this is the first time that a panic attack occurs. So it may be, I often see students who complain of their first panic attack where they did not know what was happening. So there is sudden increase of palpitation, heart rate, and there's a racing heart. They often complain of a racing heart, perspiring, losing control over self. There's this increased fear that's grasping over them, and there's this faintness or dizzy feeling that I may fall down and faint. Now, the individual may also be having sweats and cold chills, and many times people complain of chill running down my spine. They have breathing difficulties, and as I mentioned, a feeling of loss of control. Several times there is also a tremor accompanying it with the hands and in the legs. Now, as you can understand, these are all related to sympathetic activation system. So if you see that these are more related to the sympathetic activity for fight or flight response, but because the first panic attack does not happen with any related reason most of the times, but that the individual can relate to, the individual starts feeling more anxious about apprehending another attack, and that brings on a panic disorder. So most of the times an individual having a panic attack, having had a panic attack earlier, may feel that, oh God, if I go to that place again, I might have another panic attack. Or last time when I had a panic attack, my first my legs were trembling, and then then my heart was pounding, and then I had a dryness in my mouth. So if there is even one symptom, the individual starts looking for the other symptoms within his body. So he internalizes his focus of attention, and that brings on another panic attack. So this apprehension of a panic attack actually brings on a panic disorder, and even the slightest hint of one of the symptoms will bring along a panic attack. So in a panic attack, in the previous session we had mentioned about hyperventilating during a panic attack. So in a panic attack, several times you will see people breathing in like taking in less oxygen, breathing out more of carbon dioxide. So there's the expiration rate is much higher than the inspiration rate. So it goes like so now we must remember that this balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide is very relevant to the body, and it is also related to whether we are going to develop the symptoms of a panic attack. So, the when a person hyperventilates, this also increases the panic symptoms. So, this the panic attack most of the times does not last for long. So, it could be for a few minutes only, but this fear that this may actually I may lose control and this may actually drop me down dead. Most of the times people feel that I'm going through a heart attack, brings along more of these symptoms and brings along the panic disorder in future. So, if you ever have had a panic attack, don't worry. It's going to just last for a couple of minutes. You just need to sit down in a place where and remove people from encircling you, or reducing the amount of oxygen by just standing over you. So, just relax and just tell yourself to calm down. It's going to go away in a few minutes, and believe me, this is not a heart attack. So, there's nothing to feel panicked about it. Now, coming to obsessive compulsive disorder, this is also another disorder which is, it's an anxiety disorder, and it is another form of expression of anxiety. Now, in obsessive compulsive disorder, an individual has recurrent obsessive thoughts. So, these are thoughts which may be related to cleanliness, which may be related to checking things. It's like, oh, this place is dirty and I need to clean this place. It could be that have I locked my door? Have I put in my admit card inside my bag? Let me just check it once again. So, now many people may feel like this. Then why do we call this a disorder, or when do we call this a disorder? It is a disorder when the thought, you've done it once, and after some time this thought has come, and you've actually checked it once. You've checked that your admit card is within your bag, but after a time the thought comes back again, and you need to check again. So, you need to follow that compulsive behavior again to stop that thought. Now, that becomes a cycle, and this is a way of expressing anxiety. Okay. So, if anybody has this obsessive checking or obsessive washing, or OC features of counting, I need to count 3 before I go for the exam. I need to pray in multiples of 3 before going to an examination hall. If any of you are suffering from these, you just need to tell yourself that, well, this is all in my mind, and this is also related to magical thinking. If I count thrice, in no way is it going to affect my paper in the examination hall. Or if I check twice, it doesn't mean that the first time was enough to actually assure me that the admit card is in the bag. But believe me, there are strategies to deal with this. It's not all hopeless, and but you need to also, if these symptoms are bothering you excessively, then you need to consult a doctor. And other than following these stress management techniques that I will be talking about in the next 2 modules, 2 weeks, it would be, if you several times you will be helped of this by these, and you do not need any additional checkups. But if you actually feel that this is really obstructing your daily routine, then you need to check out with a doctor once. Now, going to the next stress disorder, which is an acute stress reaction. This is very, very related or relevant to stress induced illness. Now, mind you, when I am talking of the acute stress disorders, anxiety disorders, they are all related to expression of anxiety, or a reaction to a stressful situation in different ways. So, it is actually how the psychology of, or the human psychology is responding to anxiety. Now, people would respond in different ways. So, if it is actually not affecting your occupation, your social life and your body, then you are fine. And if it's helping you to perform, we spoke about eustress and distress in the first week. where stress could be helpful to perform, but if it is not helping you and it's aggravating the symptoms, then you need to really be wary about it. Now, in acute stress reaction, it is a mental condition that can occur following exposure to extreme stress or trauma, and the symptoms may last for at least 2 days to up to 4 weeks. What happens is, here all the symptoms of sympathetic arousal are seen. So basically you have avoidance symptoms, avoidance of the stimulus that may have caused the stress. There may be recurrent dreams and distressful visions of the stressful situation of the trauma, as if an individual has undergone an accident or is a victim of abuse, then these symptoms could be very often seen. Now, there could be a hyperarousal, so which is representative of that state. So even when that individual is not in that acute stressful situation, his or her body may be undergoing the arousal that was present during that situation. So this can be very distressing to the patient, and it may be accompanied by all the sympathetic activation arousals like palpitations, like sweating of palms, perspiration, shortness of breath, and other panic related symptoms also. Now, again, if the trauma is followed, if there is anxiety reactions follows a trauma, then several times, maybe between 3 months or maybe even after 3 months, that is after a certain period of time, then we call this a post-traumatic stress disorder. So why is it called post-traumatic stress disorder? It is because it is following the stressful situation. So here the symptoms last for a period of at least a month following the traumatic event. Now, in acute PTSD, the symptom duration is of 3 months or less, and in chronic it is for more than 3 months. Several times the onset of post-traumatic stress disorder could be delayed for months and even after years. So here many times the individual has the same symptoms as an acute stress reaction, but they could also have derealization and depersonalization and dissociative reactions. So something like not being able to remember the traumatic event, or it is also followed by bursts of emotional reactions like crying and anger outbursts. And also for children, post-traumatic stress in PTSD, we come across enuresis or bedwetting at night, and it may be also followed by depression several times. Now, PTSD, I'll just give you a personal experience that I had. It was very unfortunate. In the year 2000, after the earthquake in Gujarat, I was there as a psychologist to help people from the trauma, who were suffering from the trauma. And there I came across several children and adults who were suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. So we saw that most of them had lost everything that they could call their own. So their house was gone, their families were gone, they had nothing to call their own, and they were living in tents built by. There was a tent city that was made by Vinod Khanna, and this was, I'm talking about Gandhidham, which was near Bhuj, and here there were the survivors were kept in tent cities, and there wasn't a single family who hadn't lost somebody. Many children we saw suffered from bedwetting, crying out at night, suffering from nightmares, and unusual blanks in memory. Many times you also see bluntness of emotions in post-traumatic stress disorder. There we saw some children talking about their school teachers who had died and several of their friends who had died very casually. So it's not that they did not care about them, but there were so many people and so many things that they had lost that it was somehow at that point in time they could not grasp anymore, or they could not take it anymore. So there was an emotional bluntness that was also seen with PTSD. Now we will get to depression and stress. So the major question that arises when we talk of depression is whether it is caused by stress, or is it itself a form of a stressor. So Salzano in 2003 states that the stress exposure which causes a depletion of the norepinephrine levels in the locus coeruleus neurons. Now this has an effect of slowing the attentiveness within the individual, and they become emotionless and inactive. So several times we see that there is also an emotional bluntness in depression, and this could be one of the physiological reasons for it. Now depression very often comes from the perceived stress. So how the individual is perceiving the stress, it may also be related to depression, whether he will feel sad about it. Or depression diagnostically does not mean only sad, but also anhedonia, or losing of lack of pleasure in most activities, this other than loss of appetite, dysregulation of appetite, and also sleep disturbances. Now, and loss of motivation and overall apathy for things and excessive fatigue. So if an individual is suffering from these symptoms, you will have to see, and may not be complaining about feeling sad, but he may be suffering from depression. Now depression again is also because of a sense of lack of control. So when an individual has a perceptual style of feeling that I am not in control over my situation. Earlier when we were discussing Kobasa's experiment, we saw that most of the managers who thought that they could not control the situation were likely to develop more illnesses. Same with depression. If an individual loses hope, if an individual feels that there is nothing in the world for me, or nothing in the future that I can look up to, that may also be causing depression in that individual. And so this is more relevant because it depends on how the individual is perceiving the stressor. So also, if an individual experiences great anxiety because of the constant thought about a stressor, their fight or flight mechanisms could be in perpetual heightened response. Just thinking about the stressor could set off the elevated response. These stresses amount to a constant initiating of the response multiple times a day if the thoughts preoccupy the individual. And as you can see, it will exhaust the individual and also bring about a sense of hopelessness and helplessness. Now that brings us to the adjustment disorders. So adjustment disorders are because of emotional or behavioral symptoms in response to one or more identified psychosocial stressors. So it could be related to a new situation where adjustment becomes a problem, or maybe a new place or new people. Now we must see that previously the patient revealed normal functioning before the onset of the stressor. So before that, if a person was absolutely okay before he joined the new job, then we will have to see if there is something wrong with the job, or if there is something wrong with the person in the way he is perceiving the job and its characteristics. So that brings us to the different types of adjustment disorders. So adjustment disorder could be with depressed mood, could be with anxiety, could be with adjustment disorder of mixed anxiety and depressed mood, and disturbance of conduct, where the individual is more aggressive, violent, and performing in socially inept ways, and is several times it is seen as a mixed disturbance of emotion and conduct, and several times it may be unspecified or may not be within any of these groups. But definitely the individual is showing a response to a stressor that is affecting his system. Now that brings us to stress and psychosis. So we have seen that stress is not necessarily always the reason for developing a psychiatric illness, specifically psychosis, but we have the vulnerability stress model shows that if the individual has inherited a vulnerability, then stress may exceed that threshold, and that way there can be an onset of a psychiatric illness or also a relapse of a psychotic illness that was already existing. So it could be that if an individual had this vulnerability or a genetic disposition, which I was talking of earlier, of a psychotic illness, then the stress acts as a diathesis, and it increases or exacerbates the probability to develop the psychotic illness or a psychotic breakdown. In this case, I will not get into the details of psychotic illnesses. I will just talk about one study of schizophrenia and stress, where Kudo and others found that schizophrenic patients have longer healing times after major surgeries, and they deduced that it could be because of the schizophrenic's dysfunction of the HPA axis. I will not get into the details of schizophrenia, the different types of schizophrenia, etc. But we see that whenever we are talking of psychotic disorders, the major reasons for the psychotic disorders are the stressors. This is a model which can be addressed, like stress, the different life events, high expressed emotions, daily hassles, these could act as stressors, and of course the genetic vulnerability or the neurocognitive disabilities, impairments or neurodevelopmental abnormalities could add on, and this may once we will have to see how the protective factors are protecting, that is why they are protective factors, how they are actually helping the person to deal with these stresses. Now, if the protective factors are absent or they are weaker, then they do not have the ability to deal with the vulnerability and the stresses, then the outcome may be relapse or symptomatic relapse and disability, and if the protective factors are active, then there can be a remission and a functional recovery. So that brings us to the increasing resiliency against stress. But before that, I just like to mention one more disorder that I haven't mentioned in the slides, which is again related to stress. That brings us to social anxiety disorder or social phobia, which it is often called. Now, people suffering from social anxiety disorder have fear of being ridiculed in a public situation. So in this case, the primary stressor is an environmental stressor. So we've talked about this earlier, but I thought it would be important that I mention it here as well. So how do we deal with stress, and how do we stop these major psychiatric disorders affecting us? What is important is building resiliency. So it is developing effective coping skills for managing stress and persistent symptoms, getting involved in meaningful activities so that you don't feel meaningless any longer, and we structure one's time and reduce the stress of having nothing to do, and also building socially supportive interpersonal interactions and relationships that is beyond, mind you, for students, this is beyond the virtual networks. So it is more of face-to-face interactions with people where you actually share your emotions, share your problems, and that really helps to keep a mental disorder away. Thank you.